Song of the Reef by Kristof Fruru. Of all the strange objects I've collected over the years, be they oddities bottled in formaldehyde, battered coins unearthed from forgotten fields, or grotesque little busts purchased from street sellers in shadowed alleys, none prepared me for the manuscript. It was not the strangest item in my collection, nor the most gruesome, but something about it, its silent gravitas, its patient malignancy, unsettled me more than any skull or scarab I ever had. You must understand, I am not a mystic nor a believer in the occult beyond the idle amusement it provides. I've laughed at documentaries about government cover-ups, I've sipped whiskey to the tales of ancient aliens, and I once stayed up an entire night reading a poorly translated grimoire out of sheer, perverse interest in its absurdity. But I never believed, not truly at least. My tastes run to the old weird, Lovecraft, Smith, Machen, Chambers, not because I expect their phantoms to rise from pages to convey hidden truths, but because I revel in the suggestion, the insinuation, the trembling ambiguity between madness and revelation. So when I saw the listing, hidden in the folds of a Barcelona antiquities site that offered me nothing more interesting than tax stamps and porcelain fragments for months, I felt a familiar itch. The photo showed a bundle of papers bound with discolored twine. The title on the first page, barely legible, read Los Cantos de Piedra. No author was listed, no publication date. The seller's description was a single line. Old British notes, Peru, circa 1900s, private estate sale. That was all. The auction attracted no attention. Perhaps no one else saw it. Perhaps, more accurately, no one else was looking for it. I bid the minimum and 3 days later was informed that the item was mine. It cost me less than a dinner at a mediocre bistro. When it arrived, wrapped in oilskin of an unpleasant stiffness, almost waxy to the touch, I found it bundled with several other brittle, yellowing documents. At first, I assumed these were protective wrappings, perhaps old packaging. But no, each bore writing, some in a curling archaic English hand, others in faint type or pencil. It was then I realized I held something resembling an assembled file, a dossier of sorts, stitched together by fate or madness, or simple archival carelessness. The manuscript itself was in poor condition, yet legible. It had been wet once, long ago, and then dried, leaving curling edges and a pattern of speckled stains across the margins. When I lifted the cover, my nose recoiled slightly. Not rot, exactly, not mildew either, but something that conjured the sensation of closed rooms, of long undisturbed crypts, of things that had ceased breathing but not ceased being. The English title had been inked in a decorative hand across the first page, beneath the Spanish. The Songs of the Hidden Reef, as heard beneath stone, by Dr. Howard Bletchley, 1904. The name Bletchley meant nothing to me at the time. Beneath it, penciled in a modern hand, clear and deliberate, Maria Inés Palomino. that name did mean something. Palomino had been a rising figure in South American archaeology. A young, driven scholar focused on pre-Incan settlement structures and their mythological underpinnings. I recalled her face from an old article, possibly National Geographic or some obscure academic journal. Sharp, intense eyes, a stern mouth, always photographed with a trowel or flashlight in hand. She had vanished in 1997. No confirmed sightings, no body found. Her disappearance was a footnote, a mystery wrapped in silence, speculated upon by conspiracy theorists and pseudo-anthropologists alike. The official explanation was a misstep into an uncharted ravine. The unofficial explanations were louder. More troubling still was the recollection of her final recorded words, transmitted via shortwave radio before all contact was lost.
There are songs, but no sound.
That sentence, it had always bothered me. It felt like something spoken not in terror but in resignation, like a truth glimpsed too late to recoil from it. And now here it was again, tucked inside a bundle of foreign paper on my desk beneath the warm light of my reading lamp. There was no rational explanation for it. No official trace of Palomino had ever been recovered. Not a boot, not a journal, not a scrap of clothing. Her disappearance was total, eerily clean, like a photograph wiped from its negative. I had pored over the discussions, the forums, and the videos of unexplained cases. I knew the pattern: strange signal, sudden silence, endless speculation. But no evidence, nothing tangible. That had always been the mark of such mysteries. Their total silence. Yet I now held something with her name upon it. Yet no provenance, no chain of custody, no archival stamp suggested how. Who would assemble such a thing? And why bind it within a bundle of century-old British notes, if not to draw a line between them? This was not a work of chance. Someone had gathered these voices deliberately. And if this truly were Palomino's voice, her hand, then I possessed what countless searchers, scholars, and charlatans had failed to produce: the last testament of Maria Inés Palomino. Would I become famous for revealing it? Was it ethical to do so? I didn't know. I still don't. What I did know was that her voice had been silent for decades. And now, against all expectation, it was speaking. There was no part of me, in that moment, that suspected what I had truly begun to uncover. If I had known what would follow, I do not think I would have opened the cover. But I did. Of course I did. The first page was written in Spanish with occasional notations in English and Quechua. It had the tone of a professional, methodical, and even enthusiastic researcher, but it bore none of the clinical coldness that so often creeps into academic reporting. This was meant to be read, not published perhaps, but read. It was personal even when it was technical. Expedition Log, Maria Inés Palomino, May 3rd, 1997. I write this from my small room in Cusco. The rainy season has just ended and the air carries the scent of tilled earth and burnt offerings. I have been reading about submerged ruins. Cities drowned not by water, but by memory. My professors laugh at me. One called it my obsession with deathless myths. But I have found something. A German journal from 1934, Der Abstieg der Stimmen, translated poorly and inconsistently, mentions a valley south of here, where the sea beneath stone may be heard. It links to no myth. I cross-referenced the phrase with several Quechua sources and found a similar one, Kakapuchu, which roughly means rock cloak or stone that covers. One of my informants whispered that it was not stone at all, but petrified water, whatever that means. I have submitted my expedition request to the university. Officially, I seek remnants of pre-Incan trade routes and ceremonial structures. Unofficially, I seek that sound beneath the silence. May 12th. Arrived in Valle del Yaqui. Remote, wind-scoured, and quiet. Snow animals. Even the insects seem reluctant to fly. Locals refuse to come past the first ridge. The last leg I walked alone. The lake is wrong. It's perfectly still, like a mirror. Not even the usual rippling from the wind. Its surface is dark, not blue or green, but a kind of silken black, like hematite or polished coal. They call it Kuchanawinawi, Lake of the Eyes. I thought the name metaphorical, but I was wrong. From certain angles and only at dusk, it does seem to reflect more than it should. Not just what is above, but perhaps what is beneath. May 14th. Today I ventured eastward along the escarpment that rises like a jagged wall above the valley floor, its edges worn and fractured as if gnawed upon by time itself. The path was cruel, loose shale, hidden fissures, treacherous slopes, but the effort was rewarded. Beneath a narrow overhang, just shy of collapsing under its own weight, I found the first pictographs. They are faint, nearly erased by centuries of rain and lichen, but unmistakably artificial. These are not idle scratches or natural fractures. No, the lines are deliberate, carved with intention and strange reverence. I spent an hour brushing and sketching. And then I saw them. Forms that spoke of oceans where no ocean had ever been. There were curling spines like kelp or coral, shapes reminiscent of sea fans and anemones, stylized spirals that echo the perfection of nautilus shells. What caught my breath in my throat, however, was the figure at the heart of the panel. Tall, stooped, its arms long enough to reach its knees, if not farther. It had ridges along its back, spines or fronds perhaps, and hands that suggested webbing or something other. Its head was elongated, not cranial in a human sense, but tapering like a blade or a cephalopod's mantle. The eyes, if those recesses were eyes, were wide and oval, and the mouth stretched laterally across the lower face in a slit far too large for any natural predator. I assumed it was the depiction of a deity, but it was no deity I recognized, no chimera of Inca or Wari lore. And yet, there was artistry, there was knowledge. Whoever carved this did so with anatomical awareness, alien as that anatomy might be. This was not symbolism. It was portraiture. It was reverence. May 16th. Today I found a shaft hidden beneath a collapsed stone altar. It leads downward into an unnatural slope, as if dug rather than eroded. The stonework is archaic. Definitely not Inca. Possibly older. No mortar was used here. Just friction-fitted blocks, some bearing glyphs I cannot directly place. One resembles a musical notation, though I have never seen its like. My guide, Rodrigo, refuses to descend. He says that the air is sick. I smell only damp and dust. I will proceed alone tomorrow. May 17th. I have spent a better part of the day documenting flora at the rim of the valley. The variety is strange here. Transitional species that I do not recall seeing in my previous expeditions. One in particular, a twisted shrub with glassy violet leaves, caught my attention. It seems to be growing out of a split in the basalt with no visible soil. The color reminded me almost of bruised skin. Rodrigo and the other porters remain uneasy. They speak Quechua too quickly for me to follow, but I catch the words Mikhuk and Nakak, which roughly translate to devour and something that speaks in hunger. I've never heard these used in this region before. May 19th. Today was a blessing. For the first time since my arrival, the sun lit the lake in full. The reflection was so sharp I could see the clouds drifting as if beneath me. I feel revitalized. I hiked along the ridge to the west and encountered a group of alpacas, utterly unbothered by my presence. For a moment I could forget the unease that's lingered since we arrived. There is beauty here. Harsh and unyielding, yes, but magnificent. The silence is not oppressive when the wind carries the scent of highland orchids. I gathered samples to press and document when I return. The isolation may be wearing on my companions, but I thrive in it. May 22nd. Rodrigo and the others left during the night. They said nothing. No farewell, no warning. They simply vanished. Last night they made a fire. Larger than usual. Rodrigo brought out a bottle of pisco he'd kept hidden from the beginning, and the others smiled more easily than they had in days. We sat in the dimming light, sharing warm food and stories, even laughter. I let myself believe that the tension had passed, that perhaps the lake's shadow had grown no further than our own moods allowed. Rodrigo even sang. He had a rough voice, but it suited the song. A coastal folk ballad about sailors and ghosts. He offered me drink more than once. I rarely indulge, but last night I did. I suppose I felt I had earned it. I awoke just before dawn. My mouth was dry and my limbs heavy. My head felt like it was wrapped in wool. For a moment I thought I had simply overslept. But then I saw the fire, cold, and the tents of the porters gone. Their belongings, every bag, every tool, had vanished. Only the mule remained, and my own supplies were untouched. Some of the food, the lamp, some blankets were still there. Even the shortwave radio sat on the crate where I had left it. Though something about it seemed off. The antenna seems bent. One side of the casing is cracked. I think it still receives, but The transmission light flickers strangely. Anyway, I now know that they've drugged me. The excessive drink, the second portion of food Rodrigo insisted I take, they softened me, lulled me, and numbed me. They planned it, all of them. The warmth, the singing, the companionship. It was farewell disguised as festivity. But I'm convinced it was not malice, it was fear. Rodrigo had been a friend, or as close to one as I could find here. We had shared weeks of work, of silence and hardship. He told me about his mother's remedies, about a brother who once saw a serpent rise from the lake near Puno. He lent me his grandfather's poncho when I was cold. He did not want to do this, but he believed it was necessary. They feared what I was approaching, feared it more than the guilt of betrayal. And I am alone now. I don't think I'll sleep tonight. May 23rd. I entered the shaft today. The descent was slow and treacherous. My flashlight flickered twice. Cheap batteries, no doubt. The walls are unlike anything I have seen. Fitted stones, yes, but they feel porous and warm. At the base, I found a chamber, circular. The floor was carved with grooves, converging toward a central basin, now dry. Around the room were figures etched into the walls. Elongated beings with ridged backs and wide, lidless eyes. One held what looked like a kind of shell or horn, and below it, a spiral, carved in delicate precision, echoing the same symbols I had seen above. But the centerpiece, oh God! In the center of the chamber lay a body, mummified, curled like a child, with skin stretched out over a frame that was unmistakably humanoid, and yet not. The limbs were too long, the fingers too thin, the ribcage extended in strange ridges along the sides, and where the ears should be, there were only slits. And its mouth. No, I cannot describe it now. I need rest. May 24th. After some hours of rest, I returned to the chamber with renewed determination. Whatever unease I had felt the previous day, whatever disquiet had twisted itself around my spine like a vine, was now buried beneath layers of analytical focus. This is what I came for. This is the find that will define my career, perhaps even reframe entire understandings of early Andean civilizations. The chamber is dry, unnaturally so. There is no water seepage, no fungal bloom on the stone, despite its obvious antiquity. The air is warm and still, carrying with it only the faintest scent of minerals and dust, like sun-baked limestone. I lit 3 lamps and arranged them around the perimeter to avoid casting shadows directly onto the walls. It is important to preserve every detail. But I began with the body. The figure lies in a semi-fetal position, limbs bent inward, arms crossed over the chest, as though preparing for rebirth rather than death. The skin is remarkably preserved, leathery, yes, and shriveled, but intact. There are patches of a dark, matte sheen across the ribcage and shoulders, as if something had been painted or applied there long ago. Perhaps a ritual sealant, resin, paint, or something more symbolic. The skeletal proportions defy categorization. The spine seems to possess 2 additional vertebrae in the thoracic region. The fingers, 6 on each hand, terminate in claw-like extensions of keratin, not bone. The toes are fused at the second joint, suggesting either congenital deformation or a deliberate act of modification. The skull is elongated posteriorly and features no visible suture lines. Most astonishing is the absence of external ears. In their place are lateral slits, clean, narrow, and symmetrical. The jaw, though closed, is disproportionately large. I suspect that, if pried open, it would reveal an inner structure quite unlike anything in the human record. There are objects placed around the corpse. Not grave goods in the conventional sense, like tools or amulets or pottery, but stones etched with radial patterns, each unique, arranged in a perfect semicircle around the head. I have documented 10 of them so far. One of them bears a shallow carving that appears to be a scale diagram, perhaps of the chamber itself or another one like it. The floor grooves, when viewed from above, resemble ripples spreading outward from the body. The central basin into which they all converge contains a fine, pale residue, powdery but cohesive. I collected a sample for later analysis. It smells faintly of copper and something else, something acrid, dry, and reminds me vaguely of organic. Not decay, though, more like the scent of old paper, warmed by sunlight. There is an undeniable ritual quality to this site. I hesitate to draw conclusions prematurely, but the spatial organization, the preservation of the remains, and the presence of these etched stones all suggest a culture that approached death not with fear, but with reverence and a certain expectation. I wonder now if the lake above is a marker, a surface symbol for what lies beneath. If this chamber is one of many. If this body was meant to be found, or if I have trespassed upon something deliberately buried beyond memory. I will continue my notes tomorrow. It is late, but there's still so much to record. May 25th. I returned to the chamber at first light, though the sun had not yet touched the valley floor. The lake remained still as death, unmoving, unbroken, reflecting the sky like black glass. The silence pressed harder today. It was not mere absence of sound, it was a presence in its own right. I can't quite explain. Inside the chamber, I examined the basin again. The powder, still undisturbed, seemed to cling to my gloves in ways inconsistent with normal particulate matter. Under my magnifier, I noticed it was not uniform. Filament structures. Hypha, perhaps, but desiccated, ancient. Could spores remain viable after such a time? The thought was absurd, yet I could not shake it. I spilled a small amount on the stone slab beside the corpse while transferring the sample to a new vial. For several minutes I sat and watched it. It did not move. Of course it didn't. And yet, when I returned the vial to my satchel and looked again, the spilled residue seemed different, more diffuse, finer. but I convinced myself I had imagined it. Later, while sketching the carvings, I noticed my vision began to blur at the edges. A pressure behind the eyes. I assumed eye strain, but it lingered. That night, the dreams returned. But they were not dreams. There were no visuals, no remembered sequence. Only pressure. Or rather, a rhythm. A tremor in my skull, a drumming like a distant surf, pounding not upon the shore but inside the hollow of my head. This morning I found one of the etched stones had been moved. Shifted perhaps a finger's width to the left. I must have brushed it. I have not left the chamber in hours. The shadows move differently here. They do not lengthen or shift. They ripple. I should be more frightened than I am, but I feel at ease, as if something in me has already agreed to this long before I ever arrived. May 27th. I do not remember falling asleep, and yet I must have, for when I awoke, the chamber was cloaked in twilight, and the lamps, well, those that remained lit, had burned nearly to their ends. One had gone out entirely. I do not recall the flame dimming. I do not recall anything at all. The grooves in the floor were now damp. I had not noticed moisture before, not here or anywhere else in the shaft. And yet my fingers came away with a faint reddish smear, like iron oxide or blood diluted in water. The powder in the basin, too, had thinned. It seemed to shimmer now, like mica dust, as if responding to my movement. I think I heard a sound. Not external, not auditory in the conventional sense, but a tone, low and insistent, vibrating at the base of my skull. When I turned my head, it stopped. But the moment I stood still, it resumed, as though tracking me. I attempted to catalogue the glyphs on the walls again, but the symbols no longer matched my drawings from 2 days prior. Had I erred? My hands shook as I turned the pages of my sketchbook. No, the drawings were exact, but the glyphs on the wall had changed. Something had changed about my eyes. I dreamt again. At least I believe I did. I saw the lake from above, as though suspended in midair. Beneath the surface I saw not reflections, but structures, arches, pillars, vast avenues leading into unknowable geometries, shifting as I watched it. And in the center of it all, a spiral of light, pulsing like a breath. I awoke with a start, and something was in my mouth. I spat it into my hand. It was a strand of something, pale, translucent, and sticky like egg white. It dissolved almost immediately. I do not know what it was. I do not know if I brought it back from sleep. I am not well, but I must stay. There is more to uncover, I'm sure of it. June. Time slips. I cannot say with certainty how long I have been down here. I try to mark the hours by the light that filters from above, but the sun seems hesitant now, as though it too fears to peer into this place. The carvings whisper, not aloud, not with air, but in my mind. I look at them and feel meaning without words, a language spoken in arrangement and distance, in the negative space between forms. One symbol now appears twice where once it was singular. Another has elongated. Oh no, perhaps I am just misremembering. But no, I drew them in my sketchbook. They are changed. The basin weeps. A thin line of fluid trails from its lowest edge. When I pressed my hand to it, the liquid clung like oil. I smelled it. It smelled of the sea. Last night, I know it was night, I walked the spiral. The etchings on the floor form a path, and I followed it inwards, barefoot, as though in trance. I do not recall removing my boots. I stepped into the basin, and it welcomed me. There was a vibration in my bones, a rhythm I could not place, yet I knew from birth. When I awoke, I was beside the corpse, and now its mouth was open. I have not written much since. My hands tremble, my thoughts loop. I tried to radio. The signal light flickered, and I pressed the transmitter key, but it didn't feel like sending. It felt like opening, as if the button merely gave shape to something already forming in my lungs. There are songs, but no sound. And something answered. Not a voice, but a return signal, pulsing and matching my breath. I know it now. The walls are breathing. I can no longer tell where my skin ends and the stone begins. That was the final entry. There are no pages after this, no closing remarks or farewells, only blankness. A few sheets remain, warped and stained, but devoid of ink. If there were more, they have not survived. Or perhaps they were just never written. I have read and reread Palomino's journal a dozen times now, searching for something concrete, some scrap of proof or reason or even fabrication. But the tone is too consistent, the references too specific, and the details too grounded in regional nuance to be a hoax. I believe this is real. I believe Palomino lived and that she found something beneath Lake Naui Naui that should have remained buried. I rubbed my eyes tiredly. I reminded myself that ink does not carry madness, that a woman vanishing in the field is not evidence of monsters beneath stone. But the air in my study had changed. I felt watched. Not by the pages, but what they made me remember. I needed air. I stood, I paced, I made tea that I didn't drink. The journal's tone was too sober for invention, too consistent. But perhaps that was a trick. Perhaps it was a hoax crafted by someone who knew how to ape the language of obsession. I wanted to believe it was clever fiction, but I failed. Now, what remains utterly inexplicable is how her notes came to be part of this collection. The bundle I purchased made no mention of her name. The Spanish title, Los Cantos de Piedra, was merely scrawled on a shipping manifest. Nothing in the package referred to her explicitly, and yet her handwriting, her voice is here, preserved, pressed between the pages like a fragile specimen pinned in a forgotten drawer. I cannot shake the uncanny sense that this document was meant to find me, that I was meant to read it, that some pattern, unknown, inhuman, moves through the world like tide through coral, reshaping without ever breaching the surface. But there is one final clue. The manuscript, older than the others, bearing the signature of a man named Dr. Howard Bletchley. And so I turned to his manuscript. Or rather, I meant to, for as I reached for the first of Bletchley's pages, a smaller leaf slipped loose from within the folds. In fumbling to catch it, I ran the edge of the parchment across my index finger. A shallow cut, quick and stinging, followed. Instinctively, I brought it to my mouth. The blood tasted sharp, like iron. I cursed at my own clumsiness. I set Palomino's pages aside and unfolded the paper fully and began to read. It appeared to be a letter, typed on an old machine, one with irregular spacing and the occasional faint strike. It was dated May 3rd, 1974, and bore no return address. The author signed only as R. Sloane. I read it through twice, and although it made no direct mention of Palomino or even of the Peruvian site, it spoke of Bletchley and what he had uncovered, and how others were beginning to notice, how fragments of his work had surfaced in sealed archives, and in the aftermath of that cursed event along the Massachusetts coast.
Elias, I hope this reaches you in a timely manner. As ever, I regret the cloak and dagger formality, but you know as well as I that the fewer eyes on our correspondence, the better. I've just returned from a 2-week appointment at the sealed archives in Arkham, specifically under the pretense of reviewing recently declassified documents concerning cultural survivals in post-colonial regional archives. In truth, I was granted brief access to a subset of sealed materials connected to the coastal purge of 28, still redacted in official accounts, but whispered of in certain circles as an aquatic contagion. Some of what I saw cannot yet be fully catalogued. Handwritten pages in archaic English, anatomical diagrams that defy classification, and, crucially, a reference to a British expatriate operating in South America during the early 1900s. The name, Dr. Howard Bletchley. He appears to have fled the British academic establishment under some unnamed scandal and disappeared into the Peruvian interior around 1903. Several intercepted letters attributed to him suggest an obsession with maritime continuity at elevation and hydrological echoes beneath stone. What caught my attention was a line in one damaged report. The reef speaks where the tide cannot reach. It's poetic nonsense to most, but it resonates with a phrase I know you once noted in your own transcript of the Dyer papers. The drowned geometry beneath the Andes. This is not isolated. Something is moving, underground, figuratively, and perhaps literally. There are reports coming from Peru, fragmented, filtered through field agents, of indigenous ruins near saltwater springs at impossible altitudes, of music heard in dreams, of petrified marine life where no ocean ever lapped. The site is unnamed in all official records, but it matches the latitude we discussed last winter. There are elements here, rituals without water, gill structures in mummified remains, and hymns described as felt through the lungs that echo rites hinted it in all the reports from the northeastern coast. If these are independent, the resemblance is uncanny. If not, the implication is vast and disturbing. Elias, I do not believe in coincidence anymore. I believe in currents. Some visible, some not. I'll be in contact again when I can secure copies of the diagrams. Until then, burn this after reading. R. Sloan. P.S. I've already tasked trusted members of our circle, not public researchers, who understand the need for discretion in these matters. If Bletchley's trail still lingers in Peru, even faintly, they'll find it. One of them believes a journal might have been recovered years ago, anonymous and untranslated, and long since boxed. I'll confirm once I hear more.
I stared at the letter for a long time after reading it. I almost laughed when I saw the date. 1974, the heyday of paranoid pulp. It had all the trappings of forbidden knowledge. Mentions of sealed archives, obscure references, an unnamed coastal town. Too perfect, too scripted. And yet, the feeling lingered, coiled low behind my ribs like smoke before fire. Sloane's language had the restrained panic of a man still hoping to be proven wrong. But what disturbed me most was not his rhetoric, nor the references to Innsmouth, which I had long assumed to be an embellished fabrication. It was the consistency again. His letter echoed Palomino's account in tone, in tension, in the unmistakable sense that some larger pattern was tightening around them both. These men and women, divided by decades and continents, were seeing the same shadows. And yet, it was madness. Salt water at altitude, music that is not heard but breathed, anatomies with no referent in natural science. These were the makings of myth, or at best metaphor. I told myself that, and I told myself again. And so, I turned at last to the manuscript of Dr. Howard Bletchley himself. The pages felt strange in my hands. Too dry, too textured, as though coated in a film that resisted both dust and oil. It brought to mind old parchment that had aged unevenly, or perhaps some organic treatment applied long ago and since forgotten, like the faded stiffness of something once alive, now preserved far too well. The ink had faded to a sepia tone, and the paper itself gave off a scent I could not place. Dust, of course, and old salt, yes, but something else beneath it. Something sterile and dry, like a long sealed drawer opened in a forgotten apothecary. I told myself I would read just one page, that I would approach Bletchley's notes with the same distance I used for all my curios. But something about the texture of the paper, the way it repelled oil and dust, felt intentional, repellent. Not against touch, but against forgetfulness. I adjusted the lamp, laid the first page flat, and began to read the words of a man who had, by all accounts, vanished over a century ago. Field notes of Dr. Howard Bletchley. Nawi Nawi Basin, Peru, March 2nd, 1904. I have been dispatched by the Royal Institute of Natural Sciences at the request of the Colonial Medical Mission in Arequipa to conduct a preliminary biological and mycological survey of the highland region surrounding the lake known locally as Nawi Nawi or the Eyes. Reports have surfaced of livestock dying en masse, particularly those animals which graze along the lower slopes and drink from runoff pools linked to the lake's subterranean feeders. The descriptions of the carcasses, bloated, discolored, with inexplicable internal growths, are naturally tinged by the local superstitions. There is talk of curses, of voices heard, of a sickness that sings before it kills. The Quechua guides hired by the missionaries will not approach within 3 miles of the basin. I, of course, attribute this hysteria to the usual admixture of pre-Christian belief systems and poorly understood bacterial phenomena. If there is a fungal agent at work here, it will not be the first time superstition has masked a microbial truth. The high altitude and unique mineral profile of these waters may well support an endemic organism, perhaps akin to the anaerobic extremophiles we have documented in the Sargasso shallows. I remain confident that this will prove a case of naturally occurring alkaloid toxicity, perhaps even a novel fungal bloom affecting water purity. Samples will be taken and cultures will be grown. Truth will be teased from the rot. Tomorrow I depart for the upper ridge accompanied by 2 porters and a mule. The air grows thin, but the mind sharpens in the cold. This is science, not folklore, and I intend to prove it. March 50th, 1904. We made camp just above the basin this morning. The terrain here is scorched by wind and time. Bleached stone, twisted brush, and a silence that deepens rather than lifts. My porters, boys no older than 20, have grown markedly quieter since our ascent. The elder of the 2, Miguel, mutters prayers into his blanket before sleep. I overheard him whisper the word nakak, devour. Today I completed a preliminary survey of the plateau and encountered a perplexing feature: a series of flat, evenly spaced stones running parallel to the slope. At first I thought them natural, just another geological whimsy, but the spacing was too regular, the angles too consistent. They reminded me of Roman flagstones, though worn almost to indistinction. I followed them uphill for nearly a mile. What I found at the end of that trail was not a spring or a fissure, but a kind of collapsed wall. Masonry, now buried beneath lichen and time. On the exposed surface, though, I found carvings. Not pictographs, but a looping, recursive script that coils upon itself like a notation without staff or measure. Beneath it, a relief, a man or something man-like, bent low and arms raised toward the earth beneath him. It occurred to me only later that this might once have been part of a water channeling structure. If these stones trace the course of an ancient aqueduct or even a ritual canal system, then it could explain the basin's unnatural mineral content. This would not be the first time primitive engineering had achieved more than its builders understood. Now, the connection is tenuous, but I must pursue it. If I can map the flow from this structure back to the lake or whatever feeds the lake, I may uncover the source of the anomalies. That, in turn, may reveal the mechanism behind the reported livestock poisonings. But this is not a matter of archaeology, though it masquerades as such. I'm not here to read myth from these stones. I'm here to read the symptoms of a poisoned landscape. The air is rather thin here, but my mind feels sharp. The stone face I examined was strangely warm to the touch, almost imperceptibly so. I will return tomorrow with my instruments and measure the ambient heat along the escarpment. There is something here. I'm sure of it. March 60th, 1904. I returned to the ridge today, this time with thermometric equipment and a barometric altimeter. The stone face measured an ambient temperature nearly 3.5 degrees warmer than its surroundings. Too precise to dismiss as sun exposure alone. No visible fissures or steam vents are present, yet the ground beneath my boots hums faintly as though some vast organ pulses slowly beneath layers of geological time. I surveyed the slope more thoroughly and uncovered an opening partially obscured by brush and erosion. A passage, man-made, descending at an unnatural angle. Miguel refused to go near it. The other porter pretended not to see it at all. With some effort, I cleared the entrance. The threshold bore carvings unlike those seen above. Spirals not aligned with gravity, but flowing vertically, like a waterfall, but falling into the sky. There is no lintel, only a narrowing of stone that feels distinctly intentional. The air inside was dry, unmoving, and smelled not of rot, but of minerals and something faintly antiseptic, like charred paper or that smell before a storm arrives. I descended perhaps 20 yards before halting. The walls narrowed and curved inward slightly, not hewn crudely, but with some guiding geometry I could not really place. I felt observed. Not watched, observed, as though the very stone remembered me passing. I found no flora or a fungus, no spores, but I did find etchings in the walls at knee height following the slope. They resemble tidal charts, or perhaps wave diagrams. I must be cautious. My inclination to see meaning in these patterns may be my mind seeking order in chaos. Still, a theory forms. This was once a water-bearing system, long dried and repurposed. Perhaps the people here, whoever they were, saw water not as a horizontal boundary but a vertical axis, a fall inward toward pressure and darkness. I left my instruments near the entrance and returned to camp. Miguel will not meet my eyes. That mule won't stop pacing. Tomorrow, I go deeper. March 7th, 1904. We descended further today. Miguel accompanied me, though with great reluctance. The other porter feigned illness and remained at camp, which I permitted only after Miguel swore to remain within sight. The mule had to be tethered well back. The animal refused to approach the escarpment, braying once, sharply, before falling into a sullen silence. The entrance passage continued downward in a corkscrew, the spiral narrowing gradually until the stone pressed close on either side. The walls became smoother, less obviously chiseled, as if the rock had flowed once here and then hardened around some ancient gravity well. It was Miguel who slipped. The edge of a groove caught his boot as he steadied the lamp for me. He fell hard against the inner curve of the passage, scraping his palm and wrist along the stone. I helped him up. He said little and muttered "no pasa nada" and wrapped his hand in cloth. Only later did I notice the smear he left behind on the wall, a trail of blood across a faintly dusted spiral carving. The powder there, dry and nearly invisible in lamplight, seemed to glisten where the blood touched it, no longer inert but subtly stirred, as if recoiling. I thought little of it at the time. We reached what I can only describe as an antechamber, a place of transition between the descending shaft and something greater beyond. There were alcoves here, shallow depressions in the wall, each carved with variations of the same motif, downward pointing waves. Some included stylized eyes, others depicted small humanoid figures diving, feet first, arms at their sides like needles. I began to take sketches. Miguel sat apart, quiet. When I turned to check on him, I noticed his breathing. It had taken on a strange rhythm, shallow but in a regular sequence. 4 short inhales, a pause, then one long exhale. Again and again. It reminded me of something I'd encountered in a medical journal years ago. Forced rhythmic respiration in cases of hypoxic trance. When I called out to him, he snapped from it with a start. Said he had simply been dozing. But his eyes had been open the entire time. We returned to camp by dusk. The other porter avoided our gaze and disappeared into his blanket before nightfall. Miguel spoke little during our supper. I watched him scratch his arm, just below the cloth where he'd wrapped his injury. I should be recording water samples here. I should be examining plant life. But instead I find myself tracing the curves of those carvings again and again in my sketchbook. They make no sense to me, and yet they calm me. Tomorrow I will return to the antechamber alone. Miguel obviously needs rest. Or perhaps I need solitude. March 8th, 1904. I returned to the antechamber at dawn, alone. Miguel was still sleeping, if sleep it was. His breaths were shallow, rhythmic, unnaturally even. I stood over him for a time, unsure whether to wake him. His skin had taken on a pallor I could not quite name. It was not grey or pale, but muted, as though the blood beneath the skin had thinned. The descent to the antechamber was uneventful, yet the passage felt changed. The spirals along the walls appeared more pronounced than before, as though the dust had shifted or been drawn away. I traced one with a gloved finger and found a faint indentation where none had been before. I began to wonder if the carvings themselves were deepening. Inside the antechamber, the air had grown heavier, not in temperature or pressure, but in presence. I lit a lantern and approached one of the alcoves I had not studied closely. Its carvings were of figures diving, yes, but now I noticed something more. In their descent, their limbs began to shift. arms lengthened and legs fused, heads tapered. It was a sequence, a transformation. The lowest figures on the pictographs no longer looked human at all. I made detailed notes and sketches. I measured the alcove dimensions, the arc of the etchings. My pencil snapped when I tried to shade in the ridges along the figure's back. I replaced it. My hands were trembling. In the basin at the center, a thin film of moisture had gathered. I ran my scalpel along the stone's edge and found a faint residue clinging to it, translucent, mucosal, and strangely absent from the coldest stone. I sealed it in a vial. And then, as I turned to leave, I saw something scuttle across the far wall. Small, quick. A lizard, perhaps, or something else. It left no sound, only a rippling in the lamplight as it passed. Back at camp, Miguel did not stir as I approached, but when I lit the stove for tea, he sat upright, eyes open, and said, "She comes in the deep." Then he lay back down and spoke no more. I did not tell the other porter. Tomorrow I descend further. Whatever lies below this chamber, it is closer to the source of whatever it is I seek. March 9th. I awoke before dawn, my mind still haunted by the image of those shifting figures, human no longer, etched into stone by hands I cannot name. Miguel remained motionless, his breath still locked in that rhythmic cadence. I called to him, but there was no reply. His eyes flicked beneath closed lids, as if scanning something behind them. I left him a flask of boiled water and descended alone. Beyond the antechamber, the passage opened into a stair, a spiral again, but inverted, cut into the rock like a corkscrew bored downward into flesh. The steps were shallow, worn, and slick in places where water must once have flowed. I moved carefully, my lamp swaying against the smooth walls. At times I heard the echo of my own breath. At least I thought it was mine. I reached a lower chamber after what I estimate to have been a descent of 40 feet. The space was vast, vaulted, ribbed like the inside of a shell. Columns rose from floor to ceiling. Not built, but grown, fused from mineral and time. They reminded me of salt pillars in the deeper English caverns, though these bore filigree, spirals again, or ripples arranged in layers like sediment. And at the center of this chamber was a pit. Not a well or a shaft, but again a basin, low and wide, shallowly concave. The floor around it sloped inward as if the stone itself had melted and reformed. Within the basin was a residue, grey, viscous, fibrous at the edges. It shimmered faintly in the lantern light like breathing glass. I crouched to collect a sample. The air near the surface of the pit felt wrong, like it was charged or brittle, as though my lungs resented its presence. And then I saw movement again. This time, not a flicker in the shadows. A shape, low, gliding beyond the curve of one pillar. I raised the lamp, but it had already vanished. A lizard? A monkey? No such species should live here. I stood frozen, straining my ears. I heard nothing. But the silence did not feel empty. It felt filled, pressurized, as if the air held back a sound that would drown me otherwise. I backed away slowly and began to ascend. The walls seemed slicker now, warmer too. I do not know if it is the descent, the air, or something else. Back at camp, Miguel was gone. His bedroll was undisturbed. The other porter said he wandered off just before sunrise. No bag, no supplies. I followed his trail until it vanished at a ridge where the flagstones begin. His footprints, once clear in the loose dust, faded into the ancient stones as though swallowed by them, as if he had never even been. I believe he has gone to the lake. I do not know what day it is anymore. I did not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the pit. Not as it was, but as something alive, breathing, expanding, its surface rippling as though struck from below. My dreams were filled with lightless depths and slow, echoing tones that pressed against my ribs like hands. The porter, whose name I shamefully realize I never wrote down, refuses to look me in the eye. I found him this morning crouched behind a mule, whispering into his cupped hands. I asked him what he was doing. He said only, "We should not have come." I returned to the lower chamber just after noon. The basin had changed. Not visibly, no, but the residue within it was thicker, more vibrant. The shimmer along its surface now pulsed faintly in time with something in the back of my skull. I crouched to observe it more closely and felt a nausea unlike anything I've known. Not dizziness, but displacement, as though my body had drifted slightly outside itself. I stood quickly, and something hissed behind me. Spinning, I saw nothing, but the columns, those great salt-carved shapes, seemed to lean inward just slightly more than before. On the far side of the room, etched into a slab I had not yet examined, I found a new relief. It depicted a woman. No, rather a goddess. Her arms wide, her body framed in concentric curves like scales or waves. Below her, rows of supplicants, their bodies bowed, transforming as they descended. One bore the face of a fish. Another was eyeless. The last row was no longer humanoid at all. The slab was warm to the touch. I touched it with the back of my knuckles and felt it pulse. In that moment, a phrase came unbidden into my mind, not in English, nor Spanish, nor Quechua. I could not translate it, but its meaning rang clear and cold. She is awake. The rest of that day, if it was only a day, passed like a fever dream. I remember returning to the surface, but not the ascent. I remembered the porter's face, but not his words. He may have spoken to me. He may have wept. His hands were wet. I slept. At least, I think I did. But the darkness did not lift, even behind my closed eyes. There were voices in the dark, deep and slow, calling not in words, but in pulses, soundless and constant, like the rhythm of blood through ancient stone. I awoke with my hands trembling and my skin damp, though the air was dry as ash. The sample vials I had taken from the basin were gone. Only one remained, cracked at the edge. A thin line of the residue dried and flaked across the inside of the lid. My notebook was open to a page I had not written. The lines were not mine. Not handwriting, but etchings, as if pressed from the page below by invisible force. Spirals again, but tighter now. Tighter and deeper. The ink from the adjacent page had bled into the indentations, giving the spirals a bruised, purplish hue. I touched one with the back of my finger. It felt warm. The other porter is missing now too. He left no note, no bag. The mule is dead. Its eyes are gone, and its mouth was open as if it was singing. I feel watched when I sleep. I feel known. I'm no longer recording these entries for science. I write now because I must. Because I fear that soon, even my own thoughts will not belong to me. There is something beneath the basin. I hear it in the stone. I feel it in my teeth. She is not coming. She is already here. I have gone down again. I do not know how many times now. I no longer carry the lamp. Its light feels weaker each descent anyway. The stone guides me. It glows faintly like marrow seen through skin. There is another passage beyond the pit. I had not seen it before. Perhaps it was not there. Perhaps it opened for me. It led me into a chamber vaster than the last. A cathedral in the deep. Its walls veined with bioluminescence like pale lightning caught in amber. There was water here, though it did not reflect. It breathed, and from it rose a form that no sane eye could hold. She was enormous, regal, scaled and soft, her form glistening with strands of the same fibrous sheen I found near the basin, now pulsing gently between her scales like breath through gills. Her bulk parting the fluid like smoke through oil, her head crowned with finned tendrils. Her eyes, oh God, her eyes were unblinking, ancient, fixed not on me, but through me. And she sang. But there was no sound. But her song filled the chamber. It vibrated in the stone, in the roots of my teeth, in the scars of my memory. A rhythm older than breath. A music made for lungs that had never known air. At her feet stood shapes. I thought them statues, effigies of worship. But they moved, slowly, breathing in time with her. And they turned, and I saw them. Miguel, the other porter. Their forms were wrong now. Limbs too long, skin pale and scaled, their mouths wide and lipless, drawn in half-smiles of reverence. Yet I knew them. I know them. They looked at me. They sang with her. I turned and fled. I remembered the feeling of ascent, though not a path. I remembered the way my fingers bled as I gripped stone that had grown slick and pulsing. I remember collapsing on the ridge. I do not know if I ever left the chamber. I do not know if I am still me. There are songs, but no sound. I believe now that the grove, the substance clinging to the basin, to the spirals, even to the pages of my own notes, is not merely biological, but something symbiotic. It responds to warmth, to blood, even to breath. It clings not to stone, but to what moves, what pulses. I have touched it. I have inhaled it. And yet it grows not in me, but around me. The vision of the goddess, she was covered in it. Not draped, not adorned, but growing from her. Fibrous, veined, layered between scales like a second skin. The shimmer I saw was not water. It was this. I understand now. It is not a fungus or a pathogen, but an extension, a tissue, an organ. These Ictian abominations are not merely changed by her. They are connected to her, made from her. Their breath moves as her does. The rhythm in Miguel's chest was not his own. Remember a dream now, from the night before I found the lower stair. Women in wide robes, bound and weeping, lowered into a still pool by priests whose faces were fish-like and distant. The sky was black, but it was not night. They chanted without breath, and the women sank. And as they did, the pool grew warm and red and vast. It extended downward, not like a well, but like a throat. And she came in the breath of those drowned. She was carried here not in body, but in dream, drawn across great distances through minds cracked open by salt and sorrow. Perhaps it was a degenerate hybrid priest mad with grief who first opened the way. Or perhaps the sacrificed women themselves called her with their final, lungless song. I do not know. I do not care. It is too late. I sat with the manuscript for hours, perhaps longer. The light outside had changed. My tea had gone cold. My hands ached and my eyes stung. But I could not look away, even when the final words had long since burned themselves into my mind. There are songs, but no sound. I do not know what Bletchley became. I do not know who found his writings or why they were preserved. All I know is that they were waiting for someone, for me. Some of the pages are still warm. The spirals etched faintly into the margins seem deeper now, as though they pressed outward from within the fibers. They weren't like that before. I've tried to sleep, but my chest feels full. Not tight, but full, as if something sits just behind my sternum, warm and heavy, like breath that never quite leaves. I clear my throat again and again, but it doesn't help. There is a wetness there, thick and clinging, like the mucus Palomino once described in her final entries. I went to the mirror, foolishly. I opened my mouth, but there was nothing, just the usual red of flesh and throat. But I smelled it. That faint antiseptic bitterness, not quite fungal, not quite mineral. The scent from the bundle, from the pages, from the basin. I looked down at my hand, at the finger I cut earlier. The wound is gone, but in its place, a softness to the skin. A sheen, as though something had grown over it. The spirals etched into Bletchley's journal, they are not where I left them. One has appeared on the edge of a page that was blank before. It is darker than the rest. It's not drawn, it's raised. I should burn the pages. I should cleanse the air. I should scream. But I sit and I listen. There is a rhythm in the stillness now, a breath beneath the silence, not in the house, not outside, but inside me. I moved to close the manuscript. I even reached for the lighter, but the paper whispered as I touched it, not aloud, but beneath my skin, like something alive pressing outward. I froze. My hand lingered, and then I listened. It is not pain. It is not fear. It is recognition. There are songs, and I am beginning to understand them.